The lights flashed red and blue in my rear-view mirror, not the kind mounted on a cruiser, but a set of party strobes duct-taped to the roof of a cherry-red golf cart. A man, wearing what looked like a Halloween costume version of a security officer uniform, was waving a clipboard at me like it was a weapon. "Pull over immediately. You're in violation of HOA Code 7 Alpha," he screamed with the confidence of someone who'd never been punched in the nose. I would have laughed. Actually, I did laugh, until he reached for a pair of zip ties hanging from his belt like he was about to conduct a full-blown felony stop. That's when I slowly opened my glove box, reached inside, and flipped my real badge in his face. "You just tried to detain the county sheriff," I said with a smile. "Congratulations, dumbass." It had been a lazy Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the biggest challenge I expected was deciding between iced coffee or an early nap. I was driving my old Honda Civic in cargo shorts and a Nickelback t-shirt, a disguise so powerful it made even my own deputies fail to recognize me at times. For once, I was off-duty, blending in with the everyday crowd of suburban nobodies. No paperwork, no dispatch calls, just me, bad pop rock, and the warm embrace of irrelevance. That is, until the HOA hero rolled up on me like we were in some Mad Max Suburbia spin-off. He came out of nowhere, flying through a stop sign like the cart was powered by vengeance. I only noticed him because my rearview mirror started strobing like a DJ booth in Vegas. At first, I thought maybe a kid had rigged some prank vehicle. But no. This man, mid-40s, cargo pants, Oakleys, clipboard clenched like Excalibur, meant business. He pointed to the side of the road. "You better pull over. Right now." I was tempted to keep driving just to see if he'd chase me all the way to the Walgreens parking lot, but curiosity got the better of me. I pulled over beside a fire hydrant, ironically violating one of the HOA's top commandments. The guy strutted up to my window like he was auditioning for Law and Order, Subdivision Unit. He squinted at me, lowered his clipboard, and said with the deepest voice he could fake, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" I genuinely couldn't resist. "Because your medication wore off." He didn't laugh. Instead, he tapped a laminated card on his badge. "I'm Officer Ron with the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Authority. You are in violation of multiple codes, including excessive rear bumper rust and improperly tinted windows." I stared at him for a long second. "You're trying to ticket me for rust?" He narrowed his eyes. "Sir, your sarcasm is not helping this situation. I need to see your license, HOA compliance papers, and a record of lawn treatments in the last 60 days. I blinked. "My what?" "Your lawn treatments. If you're using unregistered fertilizers, that's a Class 3 ecological disruption under the bylaws." I was genuinely torn between doubling down on the dumb civilian act or revealing who I was. But watching this man commit to the performance of a lifetime was so bizarrely entertaining that I couldn't interrupt the show just yet. "You got jurisdiction off the sidewalks now?" I asked, pretending to dig for my license. Willow Creek regulations clearly state that any violations visible from the road may be enforced by HOA safety officers. That includes you, buddy. He was about to ask me to step out of the vehicle when I saw it, the zip ties. That was the moment it stopped being funny. He wasn't just playing pretend. This dude thought he had real power. I reached into my glove box, pulled out my leather badge holder, and let it snap open in the sunlight like a movie reveal. He stopped mid-sentence. "What the hell is this?" "That's a badge." "My badge. Sheriff Denny Wilcox, Clark County. And you, my friend, just attempted to detain a law enforcement officer under color of authority. That's a felony." I watched the blood drain from his face like someone had pulled the plug on his ego. His mouth opened and closed a few times, searching for the right combination of words that would turn back time. Then, like a raccoon caught in a pantry, he spun around, sprinted to his golf cart, and took off down the road doing a solid 12 miles per hour. Now, I could have let him go, written it off as some delusional power trip, and laughed about it later. But something about the whole scene didn't sit right. The uniform was cheap, sure, but the patches were accurate replicas. His radio wasn't a toy. And that laminated card? It had a seal on it I didn't recognize. This wasn't some DIY cosplay. It was something bigger. back at the station, I pulled the body cam footage from my dash mount. I played it twice, pausing on the insignia on his chest. There it was again. WCA, Willow Creek Estates Authority. Not association. Authority. A minor difference, but the kind that screamed. We're more than a bunch of lawn-obsessed neighbors. Later that night, I got a call from a resident, elderly, shaken, claiming an HOA officer had fined her $800 for having too many lawn gnomes. The gnomes had apparently violated the Uniform Landscape Standard. When she refused to remove them, she said, 2 men threatened to return with bolt cutters. By bedtime, I had 5 more messages on my voicemail. One man said his fence was confiscated. Another claimed his dog was put under temporary neighborhood probation. One woman swore someone had taken her garden hose and replaced it with one color approved by the HOA, delivered with a $150 compliance adjustment fee. I laid in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, letting all of it sink in. A fake cop tried to pull me over on my day off, and now I was getting calls about gnome raids and hose swaps. Something about this HOA wasn't just overreaching. It was organized, coordinated, and above all else it was pretending to be the law, which meant it was time someone reminded them who the real law was. And that someone was about to make their lives a very non-compliant hell. The next morning started with a knock on my door, not the casual kind that neighbors use to ask for sugar or complain about your lawn, but a fast, sharp rhythm that says whoever's out there thinks they have authority. I didn't answer right away. I just watched through the peephole. It was a teenager in a neon yellow vest holding a tablet and wearing a smug look like he'd just caught me littering in the woods. He tapped a screen, glanced at my house, then left a slip on the doorknob and walked off like he'd performed a public service. When I finally opened the door, I saw the slip, non-compliant mailbox spacing, $120 fine, HOA violation code 5.2a. It was getting personal now. I hadn't joined this neighborhood to be under surveillance. I was supposed to be the guy making sure things didn't get out of hand. And somehow, a committee of lawn maniacs was issuing citations like they were a branch of government. I tossed the slip in the trash and sat down with a cup of coffee, reviewing my notes from the night before. Code 77A was real. That HOA meeting hadn't been a one-off. There was structure, fear, and silence from the residents. It was like a cult, except instead of robes and candles, they had weed whackers and Excel spreadsheets. The day after my bizarre roadside run-in with the HOA enforcer, I tried to convince myself it was a one-off. A nut job with a clipboard and too much free time. But the more I replayed the encounter in my mind, the more it felt wrong. Not just weird, wrong. There was a sharpness to it, a precision that didn't match the bumbling performance. Sure, he looked ridiculous, but the uniform? The patches? The radio clipped to his shoulder? They weren't cheap Halloween props. They were custom. They were planned. This wasn't cosplay. It was organized. And if there's one thing I've learned in law enforcement, it's that people with fake power don't invest that kind of effort unless they think they're untouchable. I figured the best way to get answers was to go straight to the source. And since I couldn't subpoena the HOA without launching a full investigation, I did the next best thing. I put on a pair of glasses, tucked my badge into my sock, and walked into the Willow Creek Estates clubhouse during their weekly HOA board meeting. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and passive aggression. Rows of folding chairs faced a makeshift stage where a table full of board members sat like a tribunal of retired librarians. The president, a woman named Sharon with a tight bun and an even tighter smile, welcomed residents with the kind of chirpy menace that made my skin crawl. I took a seat near the back and pretended to read a pamphlet about recycling bins. A woman next to me whispered that she was fined last month for having excessively enthusiastic seasonal decorations. Her crime? Inflatable pumpkins. Apparently, 2 were acceptable. 4 was a disturbance. I nodded politely and took mental notes. One by one, people stepped up to the mic and shared their grievances. A man was written up for owning a charcoal grill. A woman said someone from the HOA entered her backyard uninvited to measure the distance between her trees. Each time, The board responded with pre-rehearsed lines about policy, harmony, and maintaining the integrity of the neighborhood. Then it happened. A phrase slipped out that made my ears perk up. "We'll be escalating that matter to Code 77A. I leaned forward. The man at the podium had just complained about receiving 4 citations in a week, and the president had offered that calm but vague phrase like it was a magic spell. Code 77A. I scribbled it down on my hand. It wasn't in the HOA rulebook I picked up on the way in. At least, not in the one they gave residents. After the meeting adjourned, I lingered in the lobby, pretending to admire the framed photo of last year's block party. I overheard 2 board members talking. One said, "Director X won't like the delays." The other nodded and replied, "We'll handle it tomorrow." Full compliance action. That was enough for me to know something deeper was going on. These weren't people just obsessed with yard aesthetics. They were speaking in coded language, referencing some unseen authority, and issuing orders like bureaucratic henchmen. Whatever Code 77A was, it wasn't about unkempt lawns. It sounded more like a cleanup directive. I went back to my cruiser and ran a few quiet checks. One of the board members, Linda Hargraves, had been named in a missing persons report filed 6 months ago by her sister. The report had been marked resolved within 2 days. The resolution? Moved away. No follow-up. No address. No forwarding contact. Just a clean, final note. I needed someone who knew the inside, so I reached out to Nancy again. She agreed to meet me at a local diner where the booths were sticky and the coffee was strong enough to wake the dead. She looked more tired than the last time I saw her, eyes darting toward the door every few minutes. When I told her what I'd heard, Code 77A, Director X, full compliance, she dropped her fork. "You weren't supposed to hear that," she said. "That's not part of the public code. That's internal." "What is it?" She hesitated. Then she lowered her voice. "It means someone's become a liability. Someone who might go public or resist too much. When a resident gets marked for 77A, they send in a compliance team. Not to fine, not to warn, to erase. They say the person moved. But really, they relocate them, force them out, threaten them until they leave. Sometimes they sabotage jobs, relationships, finances. Sometimes they just disappear." I stared at her. "And Director X? Who is it?" "No one knows. All orders come through encrypted messages. I saw one once. It was marked with a seal. Nothing official, just a black emblem with a tree and scales. But whoever Director X is, they're not just running the HOA. They're controlling the whole structure." I sat back, trying to digest it all. HOA enforcement squads, secret codes, hidden leaders. It was like a conspiracy thriller wrapped in patio furniture. And worst of all, the residents had no idea. They thought they were living in a community. What they were living in was a controlled environment. That night, I drove around the neighborhood, slower than usual, eyes scanning every corner. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Tiny cameras embedded in decorative lampposts. Strange unmarked boxes attached to trees. Identical white vans parked at the ends of cul-de-sacs with their engines idling. On one street, a man was being yelled at by a uniformed woman with an HOA badge for painting his fence without prior color approval. The man looked like he wanted to fight but knew better. He lowered his head and nodded as she handed him a citation. When I got back home, I sat in the dark with the blinds drawn and the front porch light off. The street was quiet, but too quiet, like the silence that comes before something loud. I wrote everything down. The names, the codes, the patterns. I wasn't ready to make a move yet. I needed more. But one thing was clear now. This wasn't a rogue HOA board or a few power-hungry neighbors gone wild. It was a system, hidden in plain sight, with a chain of command, with strategy, with rules not even the residents knew existed. And I had just scratched the surface. I looked out the window at the street. A golf cart drove slowly past my house. No lights, just the quiet hum of wheels on pavement. As it disappeared into the night, I made myself a promise. If they were going to keep playing by their secret rules, then it was time someone rewrote the whole damn rulebook. And I was going to start with code 77A. They came back the next day. This time it wasn't just a couple of clipboard warriors sneaking around like they were looking for illegal rose bushes. It was a full-on convoy for golf carts in formation, moving slow, quiet, with their fake emergency lights spinning like disco balls. Each one carried 2 HOA officers, dressed in those ridiculous uniforms that still somehow managed to be unsettling. Matching sunglasses, radios buzzing with coded language, and clipboards clutched like they were sacred scrolls. One cart even had a siren. A real one. Not the kind kids play with, but a genuine ear-piercing whoop that echoed down the street like a warning shot. They parked across from my house, diagonally, tires kissing the curb like they were marking territory. I watched them from the window, coffee mug in hand, as they stepped out in synchronized fashion and started pretending to inspect my property. One took photos of my mailbox from 6 angles. Another walked a tape measure across the front lawn. The third one knelt to inspect the grass height near my driveway, and I swear I heard him whisper, "Outrageous. 2 inches above standard." It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so real. This wasn't some overzealous neighborhood committee anymore. This was a coordinated intimidation tactic. They wanted me to snap, to lose my cool and make a mistake. But I've dealt with real criminals, people who shoot first and bury the questions later. These guys were weekend warriors with delusions of grandeur. But the problem with delusions is that they become dangerous when shared by too many people. I stepped outside, still in my flannel pajama pants and sheriff's department t-shirt, and leaned against my porch railing. You boys planning to start a landscaping business, or are you just casing the place for fun? One of them, tall, stiff posture, aviators that didn't quite fit his face, turned and offered a mock salute. "We're conducting a scheduled Tier 3 inspection, sir. HOA protocol." I nodded slowly. Funny, because I don't remember scheduling anything, and I sure as hell don't remember giving permission for a search. It's in the bylaws. Section 12. Entry by visual proximity. Your property faces the common road, which makes it subject to visible inspection. I grinned. Good thing the law says otherwise. He smirked back, too confident for his own good. "We're not breaking the law, Sheriff. We're enforcing community standards, with or without your cooperation." And with that, they climbed back into their carts and drove off like a retreating militia, no doubt off to harass some poor soul whose garden gnome wasn't regulation height. I walked back inside and slammed the door harder than necessary. That interaction proved it. They weren't just watching me anymore. They were pushing, testing, seeing how far they could go before I retaliated. That night, I drove out past the neighborhood and parked near a small creek. Nancy met me there, climbing into my car with a worn backpack and dark circles under her eyes. She handed me a flash drive. "This is everything I have left," she said. "They deleted most of it when I left the HOA, but I made copies. Rosters, patrol routes, expense reports, even some internal memos. You want to see the file marked Midnight Plans?" I took the drive and looked at her. "What's that one?" "It's the expansion project. They've already drafted plans to extend HOA authority to neighboring communities. They're calling it Unified Living. If it works here, they'll replicate it. And it won't stop with lawn violations. They're talking about personal conduct, political views, even internet history." I shook my head. "That's not an HOA. That's a dictatorship with decorative mulch." She didn't laugh. "That's why I left. That's why I've been scared. And that's why you have to stop them before it gets worse." I drove home in silence, my mind racing, already planning the next move. I needed proof, something solid, something so undeniable. Even the mayor couldn't brush it off as local drama. The flash drive was good, but I needed them in the act. So I set a trap. The next morning, I deliberately broke half a dozen HOA regulations. I painted my mailbox fluorescent green. I left my garbage bins at the curb 3 days early. I put a plastic flamingo on the lawn and set up a kiddie pool with a floating beer can cooler. And for the grand finale, I installed a fake gnome rave scene on the grass, miniature DJ booth, glow sticks, even tiny strobe lights. Then I waited. It didn't take long. That evening, just before sunset, the HOA convoy returned. 5 carts this time, full uniform, and something new, body cameras strapped to their chests. They approached like a SWAT team, preparing to breach a bunker. "Sir, step outside immediately. You are in violation of multiple community ordinances," one of them announced over a loudspeaker. I opened the door casually and stepped onto the porch. "Which ones? The flamingo or the gnome rave?" "This is not a joke," another one said, already pulling zip ties from his belt. That was my cue. I tapped my phone. Behind me, the hidden camera feed went live to my secure cloud storage, and within seconds, it was mirrored on a private channel I'd set up for the county prosecutor. Every word, every threat, every fake citation, they were all being recorded in real time. "You're attempting to detain a private citizen on private property using fake authority," I said loud enough for the mics to pick up. "And you're doing it while impersonating law enforcement. That's 2 felonies and a civil lawsuit waiting to happen." The leader hesitated. I could see the doubt creeping in now. They hadn't expected me to be prepared. They'd come looking for weakness, and instead found a legal minefield. "You're bluffing," he muttered. "You think so?" I stepped aside and pointed to my window. Inside, my actual badge and sidearm rested on the table in full view. "Why don't you go ahead and test that theory?" They backed off slowly. No sudden moves. No more smug posturing. One by one, they got into their carts and drove off without another word. I waited until they were gone, then went inside and poured myself a drink. Not to celebrate. This was just the first battle in what was clearly going to be a long war. But it was a win. A necessary one. That night, my doorbell rang at 11:42 p.m. I checked the camera feed. No one there. Just a small envelope on the porch. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single note, typed and unsigned. "Back off, Sheriff. This isn't your fight." I stared at the paper for a long time. They were wrong. This was exactly my fight. I sat in my office, staring at the note again. It was small, just a single sheet of paper, but the weight it carried was heavier than most arrest warrants I'd signed. No name, no signature, no fingerprint, no smudge. Just the words, "Back off, Sheriff. This isn't your fight." It was printed, not handwritten, and the font choice, Basic Times New Roman, told me this wasn't some unhinged neighbor acting out of boredom. This was controlled, deliberate, threatening, but polished. It didn't come from amateurs. It came from someone who knew what they were doing. Someone with power. And I had a sinking feeling I already knew who. I started digging through Old Town Council records the next morning. I was looking for anything that might connect the HOA to someone with real influence. It didn't take long. The more I searched, the more names I recognized. 4 of the 7 HOA board members had been appointed during special town sessions, all sponsored by the same person, Mayor Eloise Harland, my mother-in-law. The woman who'd once spent 20 minutes lecturing me about my unironed shirt at Thanksgiving dinner had handpicked the people now threatening me in the middle of the night. That wasn't just nepotism. That was strategy. I didn't want to believe it. Eloise had always been a control freak, sure, but this went beyond micromanaging sidewalk chalk and neighborhood block parties. She'd built something bigger, something more insidious. I tried to talk myself out of it. Maybe she didn't know what the HOA was doing. Maybe she just wanted clean streets and quiet nights, and got wrapped up with the wrong people. But I'd seen the cameras, the files, the uniforms. You don't fund and protect an organization like that without knowing exactly what it's doing. Still, I needed proof. So I called in a favor from an old friend, Felix, a cybersecurity consultant, who owed me for that time I pulled him out of a bar, fight he definitely started. He met me behind the local library, of all places, wearing sunglasses and a hoodie like we were auditioning for a spy movie. I handed him Nancy's flash drive and asked him to trace the digital memos, specifically the ones signed by Director X. Felix worked fast. Within 24 hours, he had something. Every encrypted message from Director X routed through the same private server. That server? It was hosted through a dummy corporation headquartered inside City Hall. The kicker? The billing address linked to the mayor's discretionary fund. The evidence couldn't have been clearer unless it was printed in bold across a highway billboard. Director X was Mayor Eloise Harland. I should have felt satisfaction. Vindication, maybe. Instead, I felt sick. Because this wasn't just politics. This was personal. And personal makes everything messy. That evening, I was invited to a special town hall dinner for local officials and law enforcement. No agenda. No public invite. Just a quiet gathering, hosted by none other than Eloise herself. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Either she knew I was getting close, or she was about to make a move. I showed up in uniform, not to flex authority, but to remind her, and everyone else in that room, that I wasn't playing games. The dinner was held at the community center. Tables were dressed in white linens. String lights twinkled overhead. It looked like the opening scene of a romantic comedy, where everything's perfect before it all falls apart. Eloise stood at the center, radiant in her usual shade of pastel green, glass of wine in hand. When she saw me, she smiled. The kind of smile that looks warm on the surface, but carries the emotional temperature of a freezer underneath. "Denny," she said, opening her arms like we were old friends instead of inevitable adversaries. "You look determined." "Busy week," I replied. She laughed gently. "Don't I know it?" She motioned me toward the buffet table, but I didn't move. I just looked at her. "We should talk." "I thought that's what we were doing." "No. I mean really talk. About what you've built. About the people you've appointed. About the notes left on my porch." She didn't flinch. That was the most unsettling part. She just looked at me, calm and composed, like I was a student giving the wrong answer in class. "Why don't we step outside?" she said, nodding toward the exit. We walked into the cool night air, just far enough from the party to not be heard, but close enough that I could call for help if she tried something uncharacteristically wild, like pushing me into a bush. "You always were clever," she said, folding her arms. "And predictable." I raised an eyebrow. "So it is you. What did you think, Denny? That some faceless mastermind was pulling the strings behind the HOA curtain? This town needs structure. It needs order. And I gave it that. With surveillance, intimidation, threats. With discipline," she corrected. "With pride. Look around you. Crime is down. Property values are up. People feel safe. Because they know there are standards. Standards enforced by people pretending to be cops." Pretending. She smirked. "I'd argue some of them are more effective than your actual deputies." I clenched my fists, tried to keep my tone level. "You've broken the law, Eloise." "So have you, I'm sure. But unlike me, you have a badge. Which means when you break the rules, people call it discretion. You've crossed the line. This isn't about neat lawns and friendly neighbors anymore. You're running a shadow government. And you're running out of leverage," she said, voice dropping. "You're alone in this, Denny. The town loves me. They trust me. You? You're just the guy who keeps chasing raccoons out of trash bins. You want to make this public? Be my guest. But you won't win." She turned to walk back inside, but I stepped in front of her. "Then I guess we'll see what happens when the sheriff presses charges against the mayor." She paused. For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Not fear exactly, but calculation. A glitch in the programming. "You won't," she said. "Because if you do, this town burns. And I don't think you want to be the man who lights that match." She brushed past me, returned to the dinner like nothing had happened. I stood there alone, the wind tugging at my coat, the stars too quiet overhead. Maybe she was right. Maybe I couldn't take her down without burning everything in the process. But I knew this much. If I didn't act, she'd keep tightening her grip until no one could breathe. And I wasn't about to let that happen. Not while I still had a badge. Not while I could still fight. Not while I was still the sheriff. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in my office with the lights off, watching the footage again and again. HOA patrols trespassing, clipboard enforcers, shouting threats, people being fined for hanging flags or using off-brand mulch. And Mayor Eloise Harland, calm as a Sunday sermon, running the whole thing like a secret army. I had the evidence. I had the motive. But she had the town. And unless I could break that spell and show people who she really was, none of it would matter. They'd side with her, no matter what laws she bent or how far she pushed the line. Because to them, she wasn't a tyrant. She was the person who brought in the farmer's market and the speed bumps and the new playground. She was safety wrapped in charm. But that charm was rotting. So I did what I hadn't done in years. I picked up the phone and called Rick Meatball Mancini. Rick had been suspended 3 times during his short-lived career in law enforcement for what Internal Affairs referred to as excessive enthusiasm for off-the-book solutions. He wasn't a bad guy. He just believed in using force where finesse would do. He ran a barbecue joint now on the edge of town, but I knew his loyalty was still good, especially if it meant getting revenge on the HOA that once fined him into bankruptcy over a handmade picnic table. I met him at his smoker around noon. The air was thick with hickory and rage. "Tell me you're finally ready to shut these lawn Nazis down," Rick said, handing me a paper plate piled high with brisket. "I'm past ready," I said. "I need bodies. Smart ones. Fast ones. Slightly reckless ones." He grinned. "You came to the right place." By the end of the day, we had a team. I called them the Neighborhood Watchdogs, but Rick started calling us Operation Law and Order, and somehow it stuck. There was Marcy, a feisty retiree who'd been banned from 3 HOA meetings for tone violations. Carl, a conspiracy theorist with 5 drones and a grudge. Deshawn, a local mechanic who'd invented a pressure washer that could strip bark off a tree. And a bunch of teenagers who were more than happy to stir chaos in exchange for pizza and immunity from truancy tickets. We met at Nancy's house that night. Her living room became our command center. Maps, pins, notes, surveillance feeds. Everyone had a job. Carl hacked the HOA's internal systems and found their updated patrol routes. Deshawn modified the golf carts we'd borrowed to include smoke dispensers and tire poppers. Marcy baked cookies laced with hot sauce to deliver as peace offerings. It was war, but suburban. Tactical, but ridiculous. The plan was simple. Trigger the HOA's emergency response protocol. Get them to show up in force. Expose them live in front of as many people as possible. And then shut them down with legal action once the town saw what they really were. At dawn, we started phase 1. I planted 6 gnomes in my yard, each one flipping the bird. Marcy parked her RV on the mayor's front lawn and lit up a grill. Carl flew a drone dragging a banner that read HOA equals Homeowner Oppression Agency. Within 20 minutes, the patrol carts were out in full force. They came down the streets like angry bees, screeching to a halt, shouting orders, handing out citations like Oprah giving away cars. It was chaos, beautiful and precise. Phase 2 was escalation. Rick and Deshawn had rigged up a sound system that played a loop of rule-breaking sound effects, dogs barking, unsanctioned fireworks, and a crying baby on a trampoline. The HOA enforcers were overwhelmed, arguing with neighbors, trying to confiscate inflatables and garden flags. That's when I made my move. I pulled up to the HOA office in full uniform, a search warrant in hand, signed that morning by a circuit judge I'd worked with for years. He didn't ask many questions. He'd received the footage, seen the files, and once he realized who the HOA was actually targeting, he gave me the green light. Inside, the office was mostly empty, until we opened the back door and found the bunker. It was built like a Cold War shelter. Steel walls, climate control, a biometric scanner to enter. But Carl's drone footage had revealed the entrance, and Felix had cracked the encryption. Inside, we found everything. Surveillance servers, behavior profiles, a full list of HOA targets ranked by compliance threat level. My name was listed in red, with a note, imminent threat. Neutralize. I walked further in and saw the worst part. A wall of screens showing live feeds from all over the neighborhood. Living rooms, bedrooms. One camera zoomed in on a couple arguing in their kitchen. Another showed a teenager sneaking out a window. These weren't doorbell cams or Nest feeds. These were planted, hidden. installed under the guise of community security upgrades. I felt sick. I called the county prosecutor. "Send the state troopers," I said. Now, we arrested 7 enforcers on site. Charges included impersonating law enforcement, illegal surveillance, trespassing, and attempted extortion. They didn't even resist. Most of them looked relieved. One whispered, "Thank God." I didn't want to measure another shrub. But Eloise wasn't there. She'd vanished. I returned home, exhausted, only to find a small black envelope taped to my door. Inside was another note. "You made your move. I'll make mine. Some weeds take more than one pulling." There was no signature, just a photo. It was me, standing in my living room, drinking coffee, taken from inside my own house. I dropped the note and scanned the walls. My clock, the smoke detector, the lamp. It was there. A camera, no bigger than a dime, tucked into the base of the curtain rod. I ripped it out and crushed it underfoot. She was still watching, still playing. But now she was cornered, and I was done playing games. It all unraveled faster than I expected once the arrests hit the news. By noon the next day, the story had already gone viral. Headlines called it a suburban coup, a gated dictatorship, a modern HOA horror story with more twists than a soap opera. I watched a news chopper circle overhead while drinking cold coffee on my porch, not even bothering to fix my hair. For the first time in weeks, I could sit outside without someone writing me up for improper patio chair alignment. My phone buzzed nonstop with calls from reporters, podcasters, even a production company asking if I'd sell the rights. I ignored most of them. The only thing I cared about was finishing this job the way it needed to end. The mayor didn't show up to her office that day. Her staff claimed she was taking a leave of absence for stress-related health issues, but I knew better. She was hiding. The bunker raid, the arrests, the exposure of her surveillance network. It had all turned the tide. Residents who once defended her were now calling for her resignation. I watched one man, the same guy who used to mow his lawn diagonally twice a week, rip down his HOA-approved mailbox post with a crowbar while shouting something about reclaiming his freedom. The dam had cracked. People were finally angry. And more importantly, they weren't afraid anymore. But I knew better than to relax. Because she wasn't finished. Not yet. The photo left in my house, the hidden camera, it was a message. She'd lost control of the machine, but she hadn't let go of the power. Which meant I had to flush her out, and I had only one move left to make. I held a press conference on the steps of City Hall. I didn't do the usual law enforcement posture or play politics. I spoke directly to the people in plain words, because they deserve truth without the packaging. I told them about the hidden surveillance, the coercion, the false authority used to intimidate and control. I told them their privacy had been invaded, their trust exploited. And I told them that their mayor, Eloise Harland, was behind it all. For a second, there was silence. Then someone clapped. Then more. Then cheering. I wasn't expecting a standing ovation, but the noise made it clear they were ready. Not just to see her gone, but to take back everything they had slowly surrendered. Fear, it turns out, doesn't survive in crowds. And that was the final crack. By nightfall, she had no more defenders left in public. But she still had one last card to play. Around midnight, my power went out. Not the neighborhood, just mine. I walked outside and saw the faint glow of a small vehicle parked 2 houses down. Not a golf cart this time, but a newer model, sleeker, dark frame, and headlights dimmed. I approached slowly, flashlight in hand, service pistol holstered but ready. The vehicle door opened, and she stepped out like she owned the shadows. I didn't say anything at first, just studied her. She wore black. No jewelry, no politician smile. Just that sharp gaze I'd seen one too many times across a dinner table when she disapproved of my parenting skills or my choice in socks. "You really don't know when to quit," I finally said. "You really don't know how to compromise," she replied. "We could have built something here." "You built a prison," I snapped. "With flower beds." It was order. It was control. She took a slow breath, like she was centering herself. "You think removing me fixes it? You think dissolving the HOA means people will suddenly behave? They'll spiral. This town will fall into chaos. I pointed toward the street, where neighbors were out talking, laughing, celebrating. You already lost, Eloise. The town's not scared of you anymore. She tilted her head. They will be. Give it time. They'll beg for someone to take charge again. And I won't be around to stop what comes next. You're right, I said. You won't. I stepped aside as two unmarked cruisers rolled up behind me, quiet and clean. Two troopers stepped out and approached her with handcuffs. She didn't resist. She just stared at me like I was some great disappointment. You know, she said as they cuffed her, you're only sheriff as long as they let you be. And when the next threat comes, don't come crawling to me. I won't, I said, because we're building something better. They took her away without a fuss. No tears. No scene. Just the sound of quiet tires and the end of an era. In the weeks that followed, the town held a special vote to dissolve the HOA. The motion passed by a landslide. The bylaws were shredded in the middle of the community square. People brought flags, cakes, bad music, and lawn furniture that would have made the old board cry. There were gnome parades, kids on bikes, grown men spray painting freedom on their trash bins. The whole thing felt ridiculous and beautiful. Nancy was named interim city administrator. The council agreed to restructure neighborhood regulations into simple, reasonable suggestions. Things like no lawn fires, no live animals in mailboxes, and no unauthorized surveillance drones within 30 feet of a baby shower. I got a thank you card signed by nearly every resident in Willow Creek. Even Rick got a few write-ups turned into a mural on his restaurant wall. But not everything was perfect. Sometimes, late at night, I'd still see strange lights at the edge of the neighborhood. A flash of a golf cart without plates. A suspicious black van parked near the rec center. The system Eloise built didn't die easily. It had roots. Supporters. People who liked order a little too much. One night, I was locking up the station when a manila envelope slid under the door. Inside was a thumb drive. No label. No message. I plugged it into the office computer against every policy I'd ever enforced. It was a video. Grainy, low-res, but familiar. A conference room. A new group of faces. One man standing at the head of the table, in front of a projector that read HOA Restructuring Initiative, Phase 2. The date stamp was 2 days ago. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but smiling. They were trying to bring it back. Let them. Because I'd be ready this time. Because this town didn't need a ruler. It had a sheriff.